This is a PRS Holdings.
Welcome to part 1 of the Hazard Communications training video. This video will cover site-specific policy requirements. In an effort to protect employees from potentially hazardous material exposure due to chemical compounds, OSHA and Cal-OSHA established the Hazard Communications Standard. The standard establishes guidelines for sites to produce a written program that address the following: safety data sheets, chemical inventory, purchasing, container labeling, employee training, personal protective equipment, emergency response, hazards of non-routine tasks, informing of other employers, and posting. To find responsibilities by position, please refer to the Responsibilities handout from your safety representative. Site-specific policy requirements. The Hazard Communications Standard requires all manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers of potentially hazardous materials or chemicals to supply customers a copy of a Safety Data Sheet, or SDS. This is information on how to safely handle potentially hazardous materials. Chemical inventory. A chemical inventory will be kept on file illustrating the potentially hazardous chemicals used for each site. The chemical inventory list will be kept in the front of the SDS book. Purchasing. Potentially hazardous materials brought into the workplace need to be accompanied by a SDS if one is not already in the file. It is the responsibility of the person purchasing the material to see that the proper SDS is delivered with the material. Suppliers are required to supply safety data sheets upon request. When purchasing potentially hazardous materials, a statement should accompany the order requesting the SDS for those materials. Container labeling. To avoid accidental exposure to hazardous materials being placed in unmarked or mismarked containers, containers will be properly marked. An exception to this rule would be small quantities for immediate use. In most cases, the label applied to the container will contain all required information in cases of exposure. Unmarked containers should not be left unattended. Potentially hazardous materials should be returned to the properly labeled containers for storage. The branch manager or delegate should be alerted by employees when a container is improperly labeled. Upon notification, the site manager should see that the containers are then properly relabeled. Employees should transfer unused materials in unlabeled containers to properly labeled containers or notify their site manager as soon as possible after use. In most cases, PRSH will rely on the manufacturer's label. If the label is unreadable or not present, the employee should inform the site manager or delegate so an adequate label can be installed. If an employee suspects a material in a container is not what the label says it is, the site manager or delegate should be notified as soon as possible to correct the discrepancy. Emergency response. In the event of a spill, use the following guidelines. Identify the material spilled and refer to the SDS for appropriate safety procedures. Utilize personal protective equipment appropriate to the hazards as indicated on the SDS. Attend to any people who may be contaminated. See first aid for material exposures for more information as indicated on the SDS sheet. Determine the size of the spill and if there has been a release to the environment. For large spills greater than 5 gallons, or if there has been a release to the environment, safely contain the spill. Protect floor drains or other means for environmental release. Spill rocks, drain covers, sandbags, wattles, and absorbents may be placed around drains as needed. Call the site manager and await further instruction. If a volatile, flammable material is spilled, immediately warn everyone, control sources of ignition, and ventilate the area. Call 911 and/or contact local hazmat. Evacuate the area if necessary. For small spills, less than or equal to 5 gallons, loose spill control materials should be distributed over the entire spill area, working from the outside, circling to the inside. This reduces the chance of splash or spread of the spilled material. Some bulk absorbents and many spill pillows do not work with non-typical automotive materials, for example acids from batteries. Do not use unless you have checked the SDS. When spilled materials have been absorbed, use brush and scoop to place materials in an appropriate container. Complete a hazardous waste sticker identifying the material as spill debris involving XYZ material and affix onto the container. Spill control materials will need to be disposed of as hazardous waste. Contact site manager for advice on storage and packaging for disposal. Hazards of non-routine tasks. Supervisors should inform employees of any special tasks other than their everyday tasks that could involve exposure to potentially hazardous materials. Review of safe work practices and use of required PPE should be conducted prior to the start of such tasks. Where necessary, areas should be posted to indicate the nature of the potential hazard involved. Informing other employers. When more than one contractor is on the job site, the Cal/OSHA standard requires that contractors' hazard communication program and SCS information be made available to each other. This will enable each company to inform their employees of potentially hazardous exposure. All outside contractors should be notified of potentially hazardous exposures they may encounter while working in their area. It is the responsibility of any contractor working alongside of the company to provide the branch manager or delegate with a list of potentially hazardous materials the employees may be exposed to. In the event an employee is exposed to a potentially hazardous material or substance by an outside contractor or employee, the exposed employee should notify the branch manager immediately to receive proper information. If an employee is using a potentially hazardous material or substance and exposes another employee, they should make sure that employee is aware of the potential hazards. Thank you for joining us for Part 1 of the Hazard Communications Training covering site-specific policy requirements.
This has been another PRS Holdings training video. Thank you for taking another step to zero.